Welcome to the fourth season of Ekamra Sports Literature Festival. I'm very excited about this particular session because I have with me Saskya Jain, and we're going to talk about a genre which really, in sports writing, we see very little of, which is sports fiction. Saskya Jain, thank you so much for taking the time out to be with us. I'd like to start by firstly
Me.
telling you that I loved reading your book. And I'm sure when you started writing it, you weren't thinking of putting it in a category like sports fiction or anything like that. Why particularly badminton and why sport?
Well, for me, I always say that badminton, when I started writing it, I realized that in some ways, to me, badminton is the true national sport of India rather than cricket, because it is something that we all play and we all grew up playing. Of course, cricket is ubiquitous as well, but us girls didn't really grow up playing cricket. I don't know about you or anyone who's listening, but I didn't particularly. I held a bat a few times and played around with it, but badminton was something we played every day. I grew up in a government colony in central Delhi, and there was a badminton court at the center of this government colony, just as there is here. And it brought together everyone. It brought together the whole colony, the whole community. The the uncles and aunties played it when they came back from work. The older generation, the nani nanas, dadi dadas, they came and played as well. The kids, of course, played, boys and girls, ages mixed, generations mixed, on that court. And so I was very fascinated by this idea of telling a story through the badminton court, a story of this colony, of different families coming together, of kind of the gossip traveling through that badminton court as it did, when I grew up around that court. And so that was the origin, the kind of the heart of the idea, was to tell the story of a colony through its badminton court. And that's how it
Saskia, those
grew.
who obviously have not yet read the book and don't know about it, can we first do a bit of a summary and a description of
Mhm.
what the book is about?
Sure. So the book is called Geeta Rahman at Championship Point, and it tells the story of Geeta Rahman, who is a 12-year-old girl growing up in this government colony in Delhi in the 1990s, in 1993 specifically. Um, and she dreams of becoming India's biggest badminton star. She is exceptionally talented at the sport, which she herself doesn't realize immediately. She knows she loves playing the game, and that's all she wants to ever do is play badminton. And she has to fight to do that to a certain extent, because of course, for a young girl that age, the idea of playing sports professionally at that time in the 1990s was not really considered a legitimate career option. It's changed now in some ways and in many ways, but at the time it was not really considered something you would do professionally or want to do professionally. And so she doesn't really realize that this is something she wants to do. She just always wants to be on court. Her father, of course, has different ideas. He thinks she's wasting her intellectual facilities. She's wasting her time. Um, and it takes another neighbor, who comes from a badminton family, to point out to her that she is exceptionally talented and that she has the potential to make it very big internationally. And he's the one who then, they become friends. He coaches her. But of course,
Right.
this friendship between this uncle, this man, this older man, and her is also, comes with its own problems that then lead to new challenges that Geeta has to overcome. And all of this again happens against the backdrop of the time, which is the early 1990s. So the Babri Masjid demolition has just happened, and the Bombay blasts are about to happen. So it's kind of sandwiched between those very two momentous events in Indian history. And the story, Geeta Rahman, she's a child, a half Hindu, half Muslim child, and she has to that, bridge those worlds on top of everything else. Um, and her mother has recently passed away, so she's also at the same time coming to terms with the grief of losing her mother. Those are the
There is
different
a very
factors
interesting thing
at
that I
play.
liked about your book. These days, whenever anyone writes fictional, there's always this thing about thinking about the international market. you've with free abandon used words like Karela, Kulfi, Kulta without really even putting them in italics or trying to explain it. And I'm sure your book has an international audience. What was the thinking there? Because even the setting, whether it's Kaka Nagar or you're talking about the names, it's so for an audience like us, we understand immediately. But outside, how were you looking at it?
I mean, it was very important to me to not write it in a kind of mediated way as much as possible, to keep that immediacy, which comes in a way, it goes hand in hand with having a first person child narrator. So most of the book is told from Geeta's perspective. She's a 12-year-old, and we're in her head, we hear her voice speaking. And so she has a specific style and way of speaking, which is that she, growing up in this government colony, she is very familiar with this kind of a bureaucratic government language, which her father and everyone else around her kind of uses at work. And so, given that everyone has this ambition for her to also join the government, join the IAS, she adopts that kind of a language and adapts it to her life, and her point of view and her worldview. And so that to have that language and that immediacy of the language was very important to me, and to writing Geeta's voice. It was essential to be able to write that voice. And beyond that, I generally believe that we are at a point today where we can write in that way and don't have to, provide a glossary or italicize. And the onus is kind of on the reader to figure out things if they're not quite following. And that, in many ways, also provides a certain charm, a certain authenticity that we strive for today in literature.
Saskia, coming to the sports part of the book, two factors that really I liked and stood out was one, you picked up issues which were very pertinent at that point and still are. Players don't make money, and so the family doesn't want her to become a player. Second, very beautifully handled is the player-coach relationship, which is also something at that point was very new in the country. And the third was this very interesting way that you've woven in the history of badminton into the book. Were there were certain things that you kept in mind while putting all this, or did the story just unfold like that?
That was a key question when I was writing the book. So what happened was I started writing the book with that original idea that I mentioned at the beginning, to tell us the story of a colony through the badminton court. And then I started researching about badminton, and I had this very eye-opening, interesting realization, which was that in an almost uncanny way, the history of badminton mirrors and echoes the history of India, of modern India. And that led me to then expand the novel in a big way. And then in the end, I had to kind of pare it down again and find ways to weave in that history. And let me tell you a little bit about that history, because it's extremely interesting. And I think it's very underexplored and not widely known as it should be in India and elsewhere as well. So badminton was invented by these colonial officers stationed in India in the mid-late 19th century. So in 1873, it was that these British officers started playing it, and then it became particularly popular in Pune. And so the game was called Pune at the time. You're probably familiar with that. And then it was brought to the UK when these boys went on holiday, and there it became extremely popular at the House of Badminton, the Duke of Beaufort's estate, and then it was renamed Badminton. And from there, just in the Commonwealth exploded. Within 20 years or less even, it was taken up all over the Commonwealth. They started the Badminton Association of England, and there were tournaments and so on. So that was the first kind of very interesting side to me, that it's so intricately linked with India's colonial history. Then it sort of grew in India. There were matches, and I found out about a match that happened in 1947. And that match plays a role in the book as well, as you know. And that part of the book is actually historically accurate. That happened just as it is described in the book, which is that in 1947, the All England Badminton Championship, which is still kind of considered, it still exists, still kind of considered the unofficial world championships. At the time, it was the biggest, most prestigious tournament. And in 1947, it was the first time that they invited players from outside of Europe to participate. And those were these two Indian players from Lahore at the time. And this was in March 1947. And at the time, partition had not even been decided yet. So it was a very precarious, uncertain situation when these two boys traveled to London to compete. And they had to overcome all kinds of odds. That's also described in the book. And one of them made it to the finals. And without giving away too much, I'd like to say that this was a very unique moment and tells us a lot about what was happening in India, because when he was in England, his home in Lahore was attacked. And subsequently, the family fled Lahore and settled down in Delhi as part of partition a few months later. And this young boy.
I also don't want to give away the plot, but
Yeah.
so that portion also wasn't fictionalized.
It was not fictionalized. This is true. And he played in, and as he was competing in the finals, he heard about this, that his home was attacked. On that morning, it was in the papers in London that Lahore is in flames. And that provided for me a very strong impetus to bring in that historical part and to link that historical part to the characters today, from the 1990s, and then sort of assuming today's time.
Oh, great. Yeah. Saskia, you've tackled some very serious issues, from bereavement to riots to partition, but with a very deft sense of humor. Were you or your publisher at any point worried that these were very, very sensitive issues, and even if it was the character saying something slightly derogatory about a particular community or a particular kind of person, that it would be an issue? Was that always any consideration?
Luckily not. I mean, my publisher has been amazing and has sort of from the first moment given it this wonderful home. So luckily that has not been the case. I hope that remains that way.
Sure. Okay. I have something. This is you use some very interesting words. I would like to understand what you mean when you're referring to intellect, because you can't you use that word 3-4 times. So can you explain to the reader what it means exactly?
So Geeta's father keeps talking to Geeta about her intellect, that she should develop her intellect and that she should foster it, and that it was for him the way to escape from certain limitations of his own upbringing, and that he, through the power of his mind and through his intellect, was able to make it to where he is today in the book. And so Geeta doesn't know all these words. She has a dictionary that helps her understand things that that are told to her, and one of these words sometimes she misunderstands. So she doesn't know the word intellect, and she thinks it's intellect. She misunderstands it, and so she keeps looking for it and doesn't find it in her dictionary. But she knows it's linked to some kind of expectation of her, and so she keeps talking of developing her intellect, but she doesn't quite know what that is.
Yes, several phrases in your book that actually make one really laugh out loud. And there's one I really want to read because it was the middle of the night and I was reading it, which is where you said that when I pin my eyes to Vicky's, I see that he's wearing the same look as a water buffalo after having spotted a pond at the height of summer. I actually started laughing out loud. Is this your own sense of humor? Because this is very evident through the book. Is this your own sense of humor that you've got, Geeta holding?
In many ways, yeah, there's so many parallels between Geeta and I, though of course there are also many differences. I mean, that's sort of the magic and the mystery of writing fiction, is that you filter your own consciousness, of course, through your characters, but also that of other people that you've met, that you're close to, or sometimes it's even just a fleeting acquaintance that leaves some kind of an impression behind that you weave into the stories. I think what I will say is that what I definitely share with Geeta is that kind of an insider-outsider position that she holds, for various reasons, because she has this kind of a half background, but also because she has this sports affinity, which others may not have. And so I also kind of grew up with all these different backgrounds and trying to reconcile these different worlds. I think children are especially apt at recognizing differences, but adapting and remaining flexible within that. And so it's kind of her way, the humor in a way to compartmentalize also and to come to terms with what she sees around her and to make sense of it. I think children have this very magical facility to make sense of the world through words. They use their thoughts and their logic and somehow put things in order that it makes sense to them. And so it was a lot of fun, embodying that character, embodying Geeta. And a lot of it was drawn from the way I remember seeing things as a child. But also, of course, letting the character kind of take over as well.
Towards the end of the book, you mentioned that you wrote parts of it in certain writing residencies. That when you go to these residencies, does that help in the process of writing?
Now that I've been to a few, I can tell you that for me at least, they can be extremely conducive and very helpful at certain stages of the writing. And at certain other stages, it may not be so helpful because there are times when you are still, I don't know, figuring things out and you kind of need exchange. And for me, I think these 3 residencies were all very useful because I went to them in different stages when I was writing. And I had already figured out what I was doing. And so to have that space where that focus and that solitude, that was then actually very useful. But there are times, I remember once I went to one when I was writing my first book, when I was figuring things out, some things weren't working, and then I went and I didn't find it that useful because I was just waiting for the day to pass in some ways because I wasn't able to write and I wasn't able to figure it out on my own. And I think at that moment I would have needed something else. I would have needed my editor or my other people who I show my work to and discuss with them and kind of or maybe just be away and put it away for 2 weeks or something like that. So they're very good. They're very wonderful places. But I think you need to go at moments when it's actually useful.
Saskia, you wrote a book, Fire Under Ash, in 2014, and this book comes out nearly 6 years later. Am I right?
Mm-hmm.
How would you feel you've changed or grown as a writer? What were the things, or even the process, was it different for you for this book?
Yes, it was different, mainly because I was dealing with historical material. My first book was set in the present, and it had grown out of my experiences kind of school and college, and so it was a kind of more immediate. It was more about my milieu and kind of finding my way around that. So it was it was, sometimes I like to think of writing a book as juggling different balls at the same time. So juggling the experiences ball, juggling the writing, the words, the prose, the quality of the writing, the voice, whatever. You juggle these different balls. So in this one, I had an extra ball which I had to juggle, which was the historical dimension. And then also Geeta's voice has had a specific thing as well. And so it felt a little more, I don't want to say layered, but there was definitely an added dimension to it that took more work, because when I started doing this research, as I mentioned, I started going off on these tangents and detours, and I realized that the book was a lot bigger than I thought it would be. And I wrote many, many pages that didn't make it to the book because I actually at some point decided to write the historical parts in their present and make them part of the book. And then it took me a while to realize that was not working. And then I had to kind of go back and weave it in. And as it happens with writing fiction, there are really no shortcuts. So I kind of had to go through that phase to make it to where the book is now, even though so much of it is I had to kind of take out again. But I wouldn't have been able to write it in the way that it's now if I had just gone straight for that. And so that was part of the reason it took me 6 years to write this book. And if you're asking for change, I mean, the biggest change in my life has been that I became a mother in that time, twice in the meantime. So I suppose that as a person changed me in many ways, of course. And in terms of the writing, people now often ask me, did it change you as a writer? Are you a better writer now because you have this experience? And given that my children are still fairly small, it makes me first laugh because first and foremost, I have to say no. I mean, very honestly, it makes me a worse writer because I have less time to write, and I'm very distracted often, and I have to kind of fight for every minute of writing and working time. So I think in a more straightforward, immediate way, I would say it's more challenging. But of course, in a deeper way, there are certain things about becoming a mother that make your experiences more, well, allow you for certain deeper experiences. You mentioned the bereavement, the bereavement of her mother. I think for me, the most unexpected emotion when I had children was that I immediately felt a sense of great joy and bliss, of course, when my children were born, but it was very instantly coupled to a sense of great grief and sadness and sorrow, because you just kind of understand the cycle of life, that one day your children will be in this world without you, and that if things go according to plan, of course, that's how you want it. You don't want it the other way around, of course. And so I think in that sense, there are a lot of layers of emotion that you kind of understand in a deeper way once you have children.
Saskia, badminton itself plays in terms of the fact, like, what sports writers call match reports. It plays a very important, very interesting part in your book. A lot of sports books are written, memoirs, biographies, etc., are normally written by sports journalists who've covered a game, right?
Mhm.
And so for them to weave it in is easier. The way you have done, which is where we'd like to have you read a portion from the book. There's very extensive, it's almost as if Geeta's character is like a professional player. The kind of shots you name, the way you describe a particular game or a match. So was that something that you've played yourself? Was this research? How did you go about doing it?
I think it was a bit of both. Part of it was the advantage I had was that Geeta, as a 12-year-old, and with her specific worldview and language, I was able to kind of get creative, and it was fine because she could put it in a way that she would just invent words for things that would make sense, or descriptions. And part of it was that. Then, of course, I had to be a little bit careful because I couldn't make it too professionalized from her perspective, of course, because she would not know those official terms. But that's where Vicky, her coach, comes in, because he would know all those terms. So that it was fun to write those dialogues where he's kind of explaining things to her. And you could play with things like deception, for example, Geeta's understanding of what deception might be, and his explanations and things. So that was fun as well. From my own perspective, I mean, I watch a lot of matches, so I think that was, in terms of research, that counts as research, I suppose, because of course you need to know the shots, you need to understand how to bring it across to the reader so that the reader understands. And that was one of the hardest parts of the novel, I have to say, because it's easier if you think of making a film, because you can just show it, and it happens so fast. Writing is a slow process, or reading rather is at the end of reception, at the receiving end, it's a slower process. So if you're describing 3 shots going back and forth, it's a question of seconds. but it take you maybe 2 minutes to read that section or more. And so the pace will feel different. And so to bring across that pace, that quick pace, and that you know, these really swift
Excitement
movements,
into those, yeah, and excitement into those words.
challenging. And to get that balance right, I think at the beginning, exactly, to get it right, how much do you mention of the match? When do you stop? Which matches do you describe? Which do you just mention? Those were all structural decisions that took a while to kind of get right.
Saskia, can we have you please read something from your book?
Sure, I'd love to.
Thank you.
I'll read a section from one of the, I think it's even the first match. So Geeta has this friend called Faraz, who also lives in the colony. He's a 17-year-old. And I think the first time that she realizes that she may be a good player is that, she keeps winning against him. And so this is from one of their matches. 20 minutes later, Faraz shows me an unnecessarily broad grin through the net. Wide, match point smalls. He is teasing me because the score is 14-13, and he doesn't want to lose to a 12-year-old girl with the Greek chorus watching. The Greek chorus are the other children in the colony watching. I make a farting noise in his direction. Faraz raises the shuttlecock. He produces his standard high serve, and I have to run backwards to return it. The high serve is a mean shot because it can be out or it can be in, but you would have to keep your eyes on the sky and on the floor at the same time to make an informed decision about whether to return the shuttle or to let it drop. To be on the safe side, I shoot it deep into the corner of Faraz's court, far enough, I'm hoping, that he cannot smash it. He can't. I swing my racket back almost to the heel of my shoe, but touch the shuttlecock gently, making Faraz race to the front of his court. My serve. Pure fluke, Faraz says, but he's breathing hard. Unlike Faraz, I don't have a standard serve. I take a step back to make him think I'm serving high, but instead I whip the shuttlecock just over the net, aiming a little lower to take the small breeze into account. The shuttlecock flies back and forth like a cartoon grenade that neither Tom nor Jerry wants to hold. Who knew that it could be so easy to make Faraz run? He returns to the back of my court. I lift it even higher and he leaps to smash, but I return it. Faraz lifts the shuttle and I drive it into his thigh. Ha! 14 all. Keep blowing your own trumpet, Faraz says, and you might run out of air. I'm not the one out of breath. I decide to try out a high serve, just to confuse Faraz and surprise him, who, impatient that he is, jumps to smash into the net. 15-14, match point. I glance at the Greek chorus, who have stopped chatting and are paying us their full attention. So I say, I think someone is going to lose to a 12-year-old girl today. I refrain from adding a 12-year-old girl with a deficient racket, because last time the Greek chorus cracked jokes for an entire afternoon about the parrots living in our house and picking holes in my shoes. I collect the shuttlecock and position myself behind the service line. I watch Faraz wet his lips. Our eyes meet. The slap of string against cork echoes in our joint ears. Faraz plays deep into my forehand corner, which leaves me no option but to play a high shot in return, and Faraz is there to drop it on the other side of my court, just beyond the net. Service over, Smalls. Though Faraz is smiling at his Greek audience, he is flicking sweat from his temple like relieved people do. I have to return Faraz's serve at an awkward angle because my thumb has got caught in the torn terry cloth of my racket handle. I would have demanded a replay, but I know the GC will laugh at me behind my back and in front of it too, if I draw attention to my disintegrating racket. So I let Faraz convert my wobbly return into a backhand net shot that zips across my court like an excessively angry bee. I run as fast as Geeta's legs will allow and even manage to lift it across the net, but Faraz follows it up with an easy-peasy smash. Ouch! I rub my thigh where the shuttlecock hit me. 15 all. My sixth sense informs me that everyone is rooting for Faraz, so I don't deign to look at them. I make a promise to myself I will win the serve back with the next point. Faraz raises the shuttlecock. I stay where I am, not wanting to give away my prophecy of how Faraz will serve from moving a few steps to the front or the back of my court, but I'm secretly betting that it will be another high one. It is. Utterly buttily prepared, I leap into the air and intercept the shot a little earlier than Faraz expects and smash the shuttlecock at his confused feet. Service over. My serve. I scoop up the shuttlecock with my racket, and a second later it is in the air again. As he returns the serve, I feel the small breeze growing, so I hold back a little to control the drift. Too much, too much. The shuttlecock falls steeply on my side of the court without even touching the net. Faraz serves deep into my backhand corner, and the shuttlecock keeps sailing.
Thank you. Thank you so much. This is from the beginning of the book, and there's several lovely descriptions there. This is Geeta Rahman at Championship Point. Saskia, I really enjoyed reading it, and I hope it's not 6 years more when you write another book, because this was absolutely fabulous.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us on Ekamran. All the best. Thanks.